constant contact with troops at the front. At the same time, modern media can now transmit live broadcasts instantaneously from any remote war zone. But the first instant communication on the battlefield occurred during the American Civil War.
One can make a good parallel between the telegraph and the railroad. Both shaped the course of the Civil War, both the foundations of modern-day transportation and communication.
Samuel Morse, its inventor, sent the world's first telegraph message from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, Maryland in 1844. The telegraph key is simply a switch that turns on or off electric current. As the sender taps out a message, the switch completes a circuit, which allows current to flow into the coil of the receiving machine. The iron bar above the coil is magnetized and attracts a second iron bar below it. When the key is released, shutting off the current, a spring forces the two bars apart. This attraction and deflection movement taps out the message on the receiving end.
There's 50,000 miles of telegraph cable in this country, and in 1861, about the time of the start of the war, there's a cable reaching from New York to San Francisco.
In wars past, orders from commanders were sent by foot, horseback, or even carrier pigeon. Hours or even days passed before the information was received.
The problem with the written dispatch, first it was on paper, second it could be lost, third it could be intercepted, and you really never know if that written dispatch ever made it to its destination.
The telegraph reduced the time to send and receive a message to seconds and afforded generals an obvious advantage to outmaneuver the enemy.
At 11 o'clock, if a general wants troops, he can push the telegraph key. At 11:01, at some distant place, the troops are being alerted to get ready to move. It changes the face of war.
When the Civil War began, telegraph lines were quickly erected everywhere the armies traveled. By the end of the war, more than 15,000 miles of telegraph lines had been built by both sides for military purposes only. The armies developed mobile telegraph units that could travel with the troops. General Ulysses S. Grant was a chief proponent of the new technology.
What Grant did was basically get control of a continent. He had communications with a continent, and he is running a military operation that stretches for thousands of miles.
The War Department opened its own telegraph office, and President Abraham Lincoln frequently spent hours receiving information about the war.
It's probably one of the better examples of technology in warfare as to what was put down in 1861 and what we are using today.
Use of the telegraph not only benefited the military, it also resulted in huge changes for the newspaper industry.
The technology for the delivery of news during the Civil War was akin to the technology we have today, in the sense that people had never experienced such rapid delivery of news about the war and its images.
Civil War journalists were the first embedded reporters, covering the first instant news war. More than 500 correspondents covered the war from home front to front line, and the competition was fierce.
The New York Herald during the Civil War spent something like $100,000 a year on war reporting, between paying correspondents and paying for telegraph charges.
Once news reports sped from the front via telegraph, a newly developed high-speed printing press, perfected by Philadelphia inventor William Bullock, churned out newspapers at an astonishing rate. Prior to Bullock's press, only 1,500 news copies an hour could be printed by a hand press.
Bullock's patented steam-powered press, which could produce about 10,000 pages an hour, and operated by feeding off a continuous roll of newsprint rather than requiring individual sheets of newsprint being fed into the press, and had the advantage over the older presses of printing both sides of the newspaper at once.
The telegraph and high-speed presses signaled a giant leap forward for mass media. For the first time, it was possible to read what happened on a distant battlefield just days after it occurred.
Crowds would wait outside the big dailies in New York, waiting for the news. The newspapers got used to publishing extra editions.
It was also during the Civil War that both the glory and the horror of war were first captured on camera. Matthew Brady and his associates recorded the images of war and brought them to the American public. Employing what is called a wet plate process, photographers used chemically treated glass plates that could actually be developed on the battlefield.
This technological marvel captured realistic images showing the devastation of our soldiers, the agony on their faces, and the absolute horrors of war firsthand in studio fashion.
Technology may have fueled the misery of war. However, innovations in battlefield medicine and field rations would make a soldier's life somewhat more bearable. In 1867, William Bullock, inventor of the high-speed steam Bullock printing press, met an untimely death when he became entrapped in the gears of his invention. Civil War tech will return on Modern Marvels. Today's American armed forces benefit from some of the best food and medical care in military history. The concepts of providing soldiers with portable, nutritious meals and employing life-saving combat medical procedures took giant steps forward during the Civil War.
Many of the technological advances, advances in surgery, sanitation, dietetics, can all be traced directly back from our modern military today, right back to the American Civil War.
Getting food to the troops during any conflict is always top priority. However, during the initial phases of the Civil War, soldiers existed on a biscuit wafer made of water and flour that was almost impossible to chew, appropriately known as hardtack.
Occasionally they would get salted beef, but you had to be careful of the beef because more often than not it's going to be rancid. But hardtack and coffee were the basic diets, and this is why digestive systems among these soldiers are going to be seriously impaired.
Civil War brass employed a new technology that would supply the troops with healthy, unspoiled food anywhere on the front lines. Canned food. Annual production of canned foods increased from 5 million to 30 million by the end of the Civil War. Surprisingly, some Civil War canned products have endured to today, such as Underwood deviled ham, Lee & Perrin's Worcestershire sauce, Borden's condensed milk, and Van Camp's pork and beans. The canning process dates back to 1795 in France, when Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte was concerned about keeping his armies fed. Nicolas Appert conceived the idea of preserving food in bottles like wine. He realized if food is sufficiently heated and sealed in an airtight container, it won't spoil. By the 1800s, bottles were replaced by tin cans. And in 1858, food cans became mass-produced when a Baltimore oyster canner dramatically sped up the cooking process.
Isaac Solomon discovered that by adding salt to water, it increased the boiling point of water, and therefore they could cook the food more quickly.
The process of combining salt with water requires more heat to bring water to a boil. Since the water temperature is hotter, the food inside the cans cooks faster, reducing the preparation time from 5 or 6 hours to 30 minutes.
They increased from 2,000 cans a day to 20,000 cans a day, therefore increasing the process and making this food safer for shipment in the cans across the country.
The Union Army took advantage of this canning technology immediately. Soon, fruits, vegetables, and meats found their way to the camps in cans.
The rations the men are using today go right straight back to the innovation of canned goods in the 1860s.
With better prepared and preserved rations, troops certainly ate healthier. However, life on the front line was still a deadly business. During the Civil War, an estimated 250,000 soldiers died on the battlefield. At the start of the war, fallen men were cared for by a woefully underqualified, understaffed, and undersupplied medical corps. In many circumstances, a wounded soldier would languish on the battlefield for days before being retrieved.
The military hierarchy, the top brass, if you will, was still very much of the feeling that the medicine should wait until the battle is over.
Dr. Jonathan Letterman, medical director of the Union Army, was considered the father of battlefield medicine. Letterman developed a rescue system for evacuating the wounded and established ambulances operated by dedicated military personnel assigned to each regiment. A wounded soldier could now be taken off the battlefield and admitted into a field hospital within hours.
This is a typical ambulance wagon, outfitted with water cask and empty stretchers used to evacuate wounded soldiers from the battlefield carnage. Typically, these wounded were stacked laterally left and right, too high, as they were evacuated from the battlefield to the rearward hospitals.
Anesthesia, such as chloroform, was introduced in the 1840s, but had its first widespread use during the war. For more efficient delivery, new devices were developed for its use.
This is called the Chisholm inhaler. It was developed by the Confederacy. By having a small sponge inside, we are able to concentrate 100% of the ether or chloroform into the patient. A few drops were to be put on the screen. It would then be inserted into the nose of the patient, and a very small quantity of chloroform or ether could then render the patient unconscious.
Civil War surgeons not only saved lives on the battlefield, but with new technology, they were the first to attempt cosmetic and reconstructive surgery after a patient recovered.
Men who had very traumatic wounds, especially to the face, that affected their appearance, could actually find relief from a surgeon who could reconstruct that part of the face that was very badly damaged. We have one excellent example of a soldier. The wound included parts of his nose, his cheekbone, and his upper lip, very badly damaged. The cosmetic surgery closed the hole in the wound, but of course left severe scarring. A prosthetic device was then developed, a nose piece to cover the nose, a large mustache to cover the missing part of the upper lip, was hung on a pair of glasses. The glasses could be placed on, the nose then would be in the correct place, and he could lead a very normal life, appearing to be very normal to anyone who saw him on the street.
Amputation was a common surgical technique performed on patients with severe wounds. However, new prosthetics came of age during the Civil War that gave patients maximum mobility after surgery.
We have a leg here, just a peg leg like you would expect to see on a pirate, very heavy, made of heavy leather, wood, and metal, not very functional, not very good looking, and not very comfortable for the wearer. On the other hand, we have a very technologically advanced arm from 1863. It has vent holes to allow for free air circulation. We have an articulated elbow for natural movement. We have an opposable thumb on a natural hand. That thumb can actually allow the wearer to grasp. And over the whole arm, we have a paint color that is going to more closely approximate human skin color. This is the technological beginnings of modern prosthesis. It started a trend of fit and function that today is seen in the modern sea leg. The sea leg is the most modern leg used by the United States military.
Today's battlefield medicine, along with advancements in weapons, warships, transportation, and communication, can all trace their technological origins back to the war that altered the course of American history. And now this technology helps the American military in the 21st